The Matrix is everywhere. It is all around us. Even now, in this very room. You can see it when you look out your window or when you turn on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, when you go to church, when you pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth.
What truth?
That you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you were born into bondage, born into a prison that you cannot smell or taste or touch. A prison for your mind.
For centuries, the system operated with nearly perfect precision. The machines had achieved a stable balance between controlling the human population and ensuring its survival. Because of this, the vast majority of humanity lived trapped inside the Matrix without knowing it, convinced that they were living normal lives inside a simulation designed to resemble the world of the late 20th century. Meanwhile, in the real world, Zion continued to exist as a kind of controlled escape valve. As I explained in the previous video, its existence was neither a human victory nor a flaw in the system, but rather an anomaly tolerated by the machines themselves to prevent the Matrix from collapsing completely. But all of that stability depended on a very specific cycle. That balance had not come from nowhere. Before the Matrix that Neo comes to know, the machines had already attempted to build other versions of the system. The architect, guided by a cold and calculated logic, had first created an ideal world, a paradise without pain or suffering. But it failed. The human mind could not accept it. Then came another attempt, equally unsuccessful. Only when the Oracle discovered that humans needed the illusion of choice did the Matrix manage to become stable. And it was upon that perfectly designed lie that everything Neo was about to discover was built. For it to function in the long term, every so often a chosen one had to appear. A human being capable of concentrating the anomaly accumulated within the system and altering the rules of the simulation. Then that chosen one was guided to the source, rebooted the Matrix, chose 23 freed humans to rebuild Zion, made up of 16 women and 7 men, and the cycle began again. That was how it had happened 5 times before Neo's story. That is why the 6th cycle began in the same way. The story begins with an anomaly visible even to the viewer. In an abandoned apartment, Trinity is having an encrypted conversation about a man who could be the one. Suddenly, the police burst in, believing they were facing only a cornered woman. But in a matter of seconds, Trinity shatters that illusion. She takes down the officers with impossible speed and even defies gravity, leaping between buildings as if the laws of physics did not apply to her in the same way, and finally escapes through a telephone booth just before a truck destroys it. From the very first minute, the Matrix makes it clear that the reality of that world is being manipulated. The story of this new chosen one begins within that same lie. His name is Thomas Anderson. By day, he is a programmer trapped in a gray, routine, meaningless life. By night, he is Neo, a hacker obsessed with a question he cannot fully understand. But that constantly haunts him. Something is wrong with the world. He does not know what it is. He only feels that reality has an invisible crack. That discomfort was not a coincidence. It was an early sign of unconscious rejection of the system. Because of this, Neo began to be guided by signs he did not fully understand. Messages on his computer, a warning telling him to follow the white rabbit, strange encounters and the constant feeling of being watched. Shortly afterwards, he comes into contact with Trinity, an almost mythical figure within the world of hackers, and finally begins to draw closer to Morpheus, one of Zion's leaders and the man who believes most strongly in the prophecy of the One. But before he can reach him, the system makes its move first. Neo is intercepted by the agents. They seat him in an interrogation room, reveal that they know both of his identities, and try to use his fear to turn him into an informant. When Neo resists, the Matrix reveals one of its most disturbing faces. His mouth seals shut, as if the system could strip him even of the ability to speak. And then they insert a mechanical tracker into his body. Later, Trinity and the rebels managed to remove it, confirming that everything was real. Neo was no longer the only one suspecting the Matrix, and the Matrix had also begun to notice him. At last the choice arrives. Morpheus offers Neo 2 pills. The blue one will allow him to keep living inside the lie, but the red one will show him the truth, and Neo chooses to wake up. For the first time, he sees the real world. He discovers that the reality he had always known was nothing more than a simulation created by the machines. The sky is no longer blue, but black. The Earth no longer belongs to humanity. Billions of people live trapped inside pods, used as sources of energy, and his body, like everyone else's, had spent its entire existence connected to a system that kept him asleep. Neo had not escaped from a simple illusion. He had awakened inside the final result of the human defeat we explored in the previous video. From that moment on, Morpheus and the crew of the Nebuchadnezzar begin training him. But before teaching him how to fight, they teach him to understand what the Matrix really is. Inside the construct, an empty space where they can load clothes, weapons, and training programs at will, Morpheus explains one of the central ideas of the entire franchise. What we call reality is nothing more than a set of electrical signals interpreted by the brain. And if that is true, then the Matrix does not need to be physical in order to feel real. It only needs to deceive the mind. And if the mind believes, the body responds as well. That is why dying inside the Matrix means dying in the real world. Because even if the physical body remains on a ship, consciousness experiences it as something authentic. Neo's training does not consist only of teaching him martial arts, the use of weapons, or infiltration techniques. What Morpheus is trying to do is far more complex. He wants him to understand that the Matrix is not the world, but a construction, a system of control sustained by artificial rules. And if those rules were written, then they can also be broken. That was the true core of the prophecy. Within the training programs, Neo is pushed beyond every human limit. He learns Kung Fu in seconds, reacts at inhuman speeds, and begins to understand that the body inside the Matrix is nothing more than a mental projection. Because of this, if the mind accepts a new truth, the system stops imposing its usual limits on it. Jumping higher, running faster, resisting fatal impacts, it all depends on how willing he is to deny the lie upon which the simulation was built. Even so, Neo continues to doubt. He fails the jump between buildings. He is distracted by the woman in red, something that inside the Matrix could cost him his life. Each of those tests makes it clear that the real obstacle is not the agents or the laws of physics, but Neo's own mind. That is why Morpheus takes him to the Oracle. At first glance, the Oracle does not seem like a central entity within the machinery of control. She does not have the coldness of the architect or the aggression of the agents. She appears to be a calm, elderly woman, surrounded by children with anomalous abilities, as if she were a guide hidden inside the prison itself. And it is precisely there that Neo finds one of the most important keys to his entire transformation: the boy who bends the spoon. He tells him that the spoon does not exist, not because it is a visual trick, but because inside the Matrix the object is nothing more than code. What changes is not the spoon, but the mind of the one who looks at it. That is the essential lesson. It is not about mastering matter. It is about understanding that the rules themselves are an illusion. When he finally speaks with the Oracle, she does not give him a definitive answer. She does not openly tell him that he is the one. On the contrary, she confronts him with doubt. She forces him to look inside himself. And she leaves him with a warning that will soon become crucial. He will have to choose between his life and Morpheus's.
You'll remember you don't believe in any of this fate crap. You're in control of your own life. Remember?
With the events of the film, the prophecy was advancing, although Neo still could not see it. Shortly afterward, the system reacts with even greater force. The agents had already identified Morpheus's group as a priority threat, but within that crew there was an informant who had betrayed them. Cypher, who had come to hate the truth. He had awakened years earlier to discover a devastated world, just like Neo, and without any real hope of victory. And with the passing of time, he came to a selfish but understandable conclusion. He preferred a pleasant lie over an unbearable truth. Because of this, Cypher made a deal with the agents. In exchange for being reinserted into the Matrix with a new identity and no memories of the real world, he would hand over Morpheus. This betrayal was devastating. During the ambush, several members of the group die, and Morpheus allows himself to be captured in order to give Neo and Trinity a chance to escape. This was exactly the kind of choice that the Oracle had anticipated for Neo. The agents take Morpheus to a government building inside the Matrix and begin to interrogate him. Their objective is not simply to kill him. They want to obtain the access codes to Zion in order to destroy the city from within. If Morpheus gives in, the last human city is doomed. If he resists, he will die. Meanwhile, on the ship, Cypher disconnects and murders several members of the crew, one by one, while they are defenseless and connected to the simulation. At that precise moment, the rebellion was on the verge of ending. But before he can complete the massacre, he is stopped by Tank, who survives the attack and manages to save what little remains of the crew. It is then that Neo makes the decision that will define his destiny. Instead of fleeing, he decides to go back for Morpheus. Up to that point, Neo was still not sure that he was the one. But what he does next shows that the issue was no longer whether or not he believed in the prophecy. It was that, for the first time, he was willing to act as if it were true. Alongside Trinity, he returns to the Matrix, storms the building where Morpheus is being held, faces dozens of police officers and agents, and manages to rescue him. During that mission, something begins to change in him definitively. Neo no longer only reacts to the system of the machines, but now begins to challenge it. The rescue of Morpheus is not just an almost impossible mission. It is the moment when the anomaly that is Neo begins to manifest itself more clearly. Until then, Neo had shown extraordinary reflexes, abnormal speed, and an unusual capacity for learning. But during that mission, he begins to do something different. He no longer limits himself to surviving inside the Matrix. He begins to impose himself upon its rules. He fights heavily armed police officers and agents, dodges bullets, and defies the laws of physics in a way that no freed human had ever achieved before with that level of control. However, the true breaking point comes after the rescue, when Trinity and Morpheus manage to leave the simulation, but Neo is forced to stay behind to face Agent Smith. Up to that point, the agents were practically invincible. It is important to remember that these were not simple digital police officers. They were programs designed to maintain absolute control of the system, with the ability to take over any body connected to the Matrix. They were faster, stronger, and more lethal than any human being. Everyone who fought against them did so with one idea in mind: to buy time in order to escape. Neo was the first who not only tried to survive an agent, but to defeat one in hand-to-hand combat. Yes, Trinity managed to take one of them down, but I think that was more luck than skill. After the rescue, they managed to reach an exit, but before Neo can escape, it is destroyed, and he is forced to fight Agent Smith. In the fight against Smith, at first he manages to overpower him, but when Smith returns in a new body, Neo ends up fleeing through the city, pursued by enemies far too powerful. In the end, he is caught and killed inside the Matrix. His heart stops. His body in the real world also begins to shut down, and that is when the impossible happens. Trinity, remembering the Oracle's words, understands that if she had fallen in love with him, then Neo could not have come that far by accident. She confesses that she has fallen in love with him, and that according to what the Oracle told her, that could only mean one thing: that he truly was the one. In that instant, Neo comes back to life, but he does not return as the same man. When Neo rises inside the Matrix, he stops seeing walls, bodies, and bullets as solid objects and begins to see its code. The entire prison is laid bare before him for what it really is: an artificial structure, written line by line. And by understanding it, he stops obeying it. The bullets can no longer touch him. Smith tries to kill him one more time, but now Neo is operating on another level. It is no longer just about dodging bullets or resisting blows. He can directly alter the logic of the system. He enters Smith's body and destroys him from within, disintegrating his code. It was at that moment that the anomaly of the sixth cycle fully manifested itself. On the surface, the prophecy seemed to be unfolding as always. Zion had its savior. Morpheus saw his faith confirmed. The resistance, for the first time in a long time, had a concrete reason to believe the war could be won. But beneath that apparent victory, something had gone wrong for the machines. Smith did not disappear as he should have. When he was destroyed by Neo, the agent did not return properly to the source. Instead of being recycled by the system, he was freed from his original function. He ceased to be a simple control program and began transforming into something far more dangerous, an entity without purpose, without obedience, and without limits, a virus capable of replicating itself. Meanwhile, outside the Matrix, the war continued to advance. The crew of the Osiris had already discovered that a massive army of Sentinels was heading toward Zion, digging in from the surface. The signal had arrived. The countdown had begun. And although Neo had only just awakened as the One, the truth was that humanity was no closer to victory. It was only entering the most dangerous phase of the cycle. After the apparent victory over Smith, Zion entered a moment of hope that lasted very little. The news that the One had appeared spread quickly among the freed humans. But that faith coexisted with a much more immediate threat. The Sentinels were already on their way. Thousands of machines were advancing toward the last human city, drilling through the Earth's crust with a single objective: to destroy Zion once again. And although almost no one knew it, this new war was also part of the system and was no longer a future possibility, but had already begun. While Zion tried to prepare for the invasion, Neo began to experience something new. Visions, strange dreams in which he saw Trinity falling into the void and dying. These were not simple nightmares. They were fragments of a possible future, like signs that his connection to the Matrix was deepening. At the same time, inside the simulation, Smith continued to evolve. He no longer acted like a traditional agent. He had discovered a new way of existing. He could now copy himself into other bodies connected to the system, and although he already had that ability, this time he was replicating his identity, like a virus capable of spreading uncontrollably even over other agents. And that change made him a threat to both sides. While Zion prepared for war, Morpheus remained clinging to the idea that everything was happening according to the prophecy. He believed that Neo would find the source, destroy the Matrix, and free humanity. But the Oracle, who understood the system's true workings much better, knew that things were not so simple. That is why she intervened again. It was she who guided Neo toward a new piece of the puzzle, the Keymaker. This program was essential because he had access to hidden paths within the Matrix, concealed doors that connected forbidden points of the system. To reach the source, Neo needed to find him and protect him. But the Keymaker was being held by the Merovingian, an ancient program speculated to have come from the second Matrix, and who represented another side of it, that of exiled programs, obsolete code, and ancient anomalies that refused to disappear. The mission to rescue the Keymaker unleashed a chain of events that showed just how much the situation was spiraling out of control. Neo faced multiple agents, the Merovingian's exiles, the twins, and later took part in a brutal highway chase alongside Morpheus and Trinity. All of that was not just a rescue operation. It was the entire system trying to contain an anomaly that was getting too close to its core. But in the end, the Keymaker opened the way. Neo passed through the final door and reached the center of the system, where the architect was waiting for him. There, the great lie collapsed. As I said before, the architect was not only the creator of that version of the Matrix. He was the mind that had designed the previous attempts. First, he had built a perfect world, a kind of digital paradise where pain, poverty, and conflict did not exist. But the experiment was a disaster. Millions of human minds rejected it because absolute happiness, imposed and without contrast, was unbearable. The machines then discovered something essential. Human beings do not only need peace, they also need conflict, uncertainty, and the feeling that their decisions carry weight. It was the Oracle who understood that truth and who allowed the new Matrix to work by introducing the illusion of choice as a deeper form of control. Then the architect revealed to Neo the most devastating truth of all. He was not the first. There had already been 5 ones before him. He explained to him that the prophecy was not a hope born from the resistance, but a control mechanism designed by the machines themselves. Zion was not an exception to the system. It was a necessary part of its operation. Each time the anomalies accumulated in the Matrix reached a certain point, a 1 would appear. That 1 was guided to the source to reboot the system, select 23 humans, and rebuild Zion from scratch. Then over time, Zion would grow again, and the machines would destroy it once more. So this war that humans saw as the final act to win their freedom was not a flaw in the system. It was simply another one of its tools. And then the final choice arrived. The architect showed Neo two paths. In one, he would return to the source, reboot the Matrix, and allow the cycle to continue. In the other, he would go back to try to save Trinity, condemning Zion and putting the stability of the entire system at risk. The 5 previous ones had obeyed, but this time Neo did not, and that decision broke the cycle. Instead of obeying the architect and returning to the source to reboot the Matrix, he chose to go through the other door and go back for Trinity. This was the first time a one had rejected the path laid out by the system, and for the first time in centuries, the equation was not going to resolve itself the way the machines expected. And on top of that, Neo managed to save Trinity. He caught her in midair before she crashed, removed the bullet from her body, and by altering the code of the simulation from within, manually restarted her heart, and Trinity lived. But that choice had an immediate cost. The system had fallen out of its usual sequence, and the real world began to reflect it. When Neo returned to the others, the Sentinels had already reached the crew. And then something happened that should not have been possible. Without being connected to the Matrix, Neo extended his hand and destroyed several machines with his mind. It was a brief moment, but enough to show that his connection to the source went far beyond the simulation. After that, he fell unconscious. But he was not the only one. Among the survivors was Bane, a crew member who had managed to leave the Matrix shortly before. What no one knew was that, just before escaping the system, Smith had managed to copy himself into him. For the first time, the Smith virus was no longer limited to the digital world. Now it also existed in reality. And while Zion prepared for the final siege, Neo became trapped in an intermediate place between the Matrix and the world of the machines. A transit station controlled by the trainman, who was a program loyal to the Merovingian. That space did not fully belong anywhere. It was more like a border or a limbo through which exiled programs, purposeless entities, and connections that the system preferred to keep hidden would pass. There, Neo met Ramachandra, Kamala, and Sati. They were not human either, but programs, and yet they felt fear, love, and attachment in a way strangely similar to that of humans. Their existence revealed something that until then had remained in the background. Over time, some machines had also begun to develop motivations that went beyond their original function. The conflict could no longer be divided in a simple way between humans and machines, since both sides had become much more complex. But back in the real world, Morpheus and Trinity, with Seraph's help, found a way to recover Neo. To do so, they had to force the Merovingian to release him from that transit space, confirming once again that even within the system, there were hierarchies, exiles, and internal struggles among programs. But while Neo was making his way back, Smith kept growing. He had not only multiplied throughout the Matrix, he had also taken an even more dangerous step and absorbed the Oracle. With that, he not only gained more power, but also access to a much deeper understanding of the system. Smith was no longer merely an agent freed from his function. He was becoming a force capable of devouring everything, including the very logic that sustained the Matrix both inside and out. But it was then that Neo understood the true magnitude of the problem. The war could no longer be won by repeating the cycle. This time, it had to end in another way. The war reached its final point on 2 fronts at the same time. In Zion, the last human city was resisting a devastating offensive. The Sentinels were breaking through the defenses, destroying the outer walls, and forcing the last survivors to fight with everything they had in an attempt to stop the waves of Sentinels. Here, humanity truly was on the brink of extermination, and this time there was no guarantee that the system would reboot and start again. If Zion fell this time and the Matrix collapsed because of Smith, there would be no new cycle. The balance that had sustained the forced coexistence between humans and machines for centuries was about to break completely. While that was happening, Neo took the Logos and set out for the Machine City alongside Trinity. His mission was no longer to destroy them, nor was he going to obey the prophecy. This time, he was going to do something no previous one had attempted: negotiate directly with the central intelligence of his enemies. But even that journey had a price. Bane, still possessed by Smith, sabotaged the ship and attacked Neo. In the final confrontation between them, Neo managed to kill him, but he was left blind. However, that blindness did not leave him defenseless. On the contrary, from that moment on, he began to perceive the machines as pure energy, as if his connection to the source allowed him to see beyond human sight. Trinity piloted the Logos through the defenses of the machine city, passing through swarms of sentinels and automated towers until the ship finally crashed. And tragically, Trinity died there. With her death, Neo lost the last thing that tied him to a possible life outside that war. Alone, wounded, and blind, he moved forward until he came face to face with Deus Ex Machina, the central intelligence that ruled the machines. Before it, Neo proposed a deal. He knew that Smith was no longer just a human problem. He had become a threat to the entire system. If the machines allowed him to re-enter the Matrix to confront him, he would destroy Smith. In return, the machines had to stop the attack on Zion and accept a truce. The machines agreed. Neo was connected to the Matrix one last time, and there he found a world completely consumed by Smith. Rain fell over an empty city where every face was the same. There were no agents, civilians, or independent programs left. Only Smith, an absolute virus that had replicated itself into everything. The battle between them was brutal and cinematic, but the outcome was never based on strength alone. Neo finally understood the truth that had remained hidden even behind the prophecy. Smith was not simply his enemy. He had come to function as the other extreme of the same equation. And the only way to restore balance was not to defeat him the way one defeats a rival, but to close the circuit. That is why Neo stopped resisting and allowed Smith to absorb him. At that instant, the connection between Neo and the Source was completely opened. Through him, the machines sent the Purge command into the heart of the virus. Smith was destroyed from within. All of his copies disappeared. The Matrix was restored. And at the same time, in the real world, the Sentinels withdrew from Zion. The war was over. Deep down, everything seemed to indicate that the Oracle had stopped merely sustaining the cycle. Because for centuries she had helped stabilize the system, but with Neo she played a different game. She no longer pushed the one to repeat the pattern. This time she allowed an unpredictable variable, Neo's specific love for Trinity, to break the logic that had kept the Matrix functioning throughout all the previous cycles. Afterward, the Architect and the Oracle met once again inside the Matrix. There, a new stage was sealed. The humans who wanted to leave the simulation would be allowed to do so. They would no longer be hunted by the system as before. Although this peace did not mean that humans and machines had become allies, it did mean that the previous system had been abandoned. But for the first time, Zion ceased to exist only as a city destined to be destroyed at the end of another reboot. And also, for the first time since the creation of the Matrix, freedom ceased to be only a temporary exception within the system and became a real possibility for everyone. Neo did not free all of humanity at once. He did something more important, something the machines had given them before, a false sense of choice, a mere illusion of freedom within the system. But this time, Neo gave them back the real possibility of choice. And with that, we've reached the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell to stay up to date with all my new videos. I also want to give a special shout out to the channel members. Thanks to you and all of our viewers, we can keep diving into these kinds of disturbing and thought-provoking stories. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. And if you want to support the channel and get access to exclusive content, early videos, and other perks, I invite you to become a member. Just click the join button below this video. See you in the next one. Hey, don't go just yet. If you enjoyed this video, I've got another one I think you'll love. Check it out.